We are live, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse District Council's Joint Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Emily Smith and I'll be chairing the meeting today. The meeting's being held at our offices in Abbey House in Abingdon. Voting members are here in person as required, but officers and public speakers are able to join remotely through Microsoft Teams. And the meeting is being streamed live and recorded on the Council's YouTube channel for public viewing. So there's a couple of procedural matters. For those joining remotely, when you are not speaking, please can you ensure your microphone is muted and your camera's off. And if you share a presentation on the screen, please stop sharing it as soon as it's not needed. Public speakers must only have their cameras on and be unmuted when addressing the committee. If councillors wish to ask a question or participate in the debate, please raise your hand in real life in the room, and we have one councillor joining online as well, so if you use the raise hand function, that's probably the easiest way, and hopefully Darius will help me to spot when hands are going up. 3 housekeeping announcements. Evacuation procedure. First of all, in the event of an emergency, please evacuate through the building through the nearest exit, which is the corridor immediately to the right of this meeting room, and stand at assembly point 9. The Democratic Services Officer present will be here to assist you. On arriving at the meeting, you should have signed the emergency evacuation procedure out there on the table out there. Please let us know if you haven't done that. Can everybody ensure that your mobile phones are off or switched to silent? And when the meeting has ended, I'll ask for confirmation the live stream's ended. And at that point, if you could leave the virtual meeting if you're online, and if you're joining in real life, sign out before you leave the building, please. Okay, I think that's Chair's announcements done. So could I ask Darius if there's been any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Councillors Leigh Rawlins and Mocky Khan, who was substituted for Councillor Denise MacDonald, who is attending remotely this evening.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item is the minutes from the last meeting. So we just need to vote to say that we're happy to adopt and sign as a true record. Has anyone got any issues with them, first of all?
Sorry, no issues.
That's fine. So if nobody's got any queries on the minutes, then can I propose that we accept those as a true record of the meeting?
Good.
Agreed. Okay, is everybody in agreement?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything on the agenda tonight they need to declare an interest in at this point? Obviously, if anything crops up during the meeting, then you can declare it then as well. I'll move on to urgent business. Oh, sorry.
I normally I can't connect to the internet, so normally it just goes straight through. See if we can your password.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
please.
trying to help you out there. Okay, so I don't have any urgent business this evening. And we don't have any public participants registered to speak.
No,
I'm just looking at Darius for confirmation. Yes. So that means we're on to item 7 already, which is the external audit plan. We're joined online, I believe, by Alex and Neil from Bishop Fleming, who are going to talk to us about the plans for the coming audit year. So yeah, I don't know which of you is going to start.
So, Chair, if I can kick off, and then what we're going to do, if it's okay, is if Neil and I can introduce ourselves, and then I'll talk briefly through the 2 plans that you've got in front of you. So just by way of introductions, so Neil and I both work for Bishop Fleming. It's quite possible that you've never heard of Bishop Fleming before, because we're a new entrant into the local government audit world. So 23-24 will be our first audits that we'll be undertaking. Having said that, both Neil and I have both done a local government audit before. So if I just talk a little bit myself, and then I'll ask Neil to introduce himself to you. So by way of background, I joined Bishop Fleming back in October last year, but prior to that, I originally started life as an auditor with the Audit Commission. And so obviously done quite a lot of local government audit and NHS audit previously. And then in 2012, I tupied across to Grant Thornton when the Audit Commission was abolished, and obviously since then I also did local government audit and NHS audit. So I've got quite a few years under my belt in terms of local government audit. I'm not going to say how many because I'll just be embarrassed by that. But so hopefully you'll feel reassured that although perhaps Bishop Fleming is a new entrant to the market, as it were, several of the team have got quite a lot of experience. Neil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. My name's Neil Hollis, and I'll be the Senior Audit Manager for the Vale and South Audits. As with Alex, I also joined Bishop Fleming in October, so I've been here for quite a short amount of time. Before then, I worked for Audit Wales, so working exclusively on public sector audits within Wales, and I've got several years of experience of working on local government, NHS and fire bodies. So yeah, also quite maybe not as much experience as Alex, but still quite a lot of still quite a few years experience of leading audits in the sector.
Thanks, Neil. So what the papers that you've got in front of you are audit plans for 23-24 for the two entities, so South Oxfordshire and also Vale of White Horse. The auditing standards require that there are certain things that we need to report to you as those charged with governance, and that's what the plan's set out to do. I'll take the plans largely as read. The eagle-eyed amongst you would probably have noticed that they're broadly similar, if not almost exactly the same. But you'll also probably notice that they're very, very similar to ones that you will have seen in the past from your predecessor auditor, because often the risks in the local government arena are pretty much the same for all entities. So the significant risks tend to be around management override of the accounts, which is a presumed assumption that it's an area that we actually have to look at all entities. So that's not just unique to local government audit or to yourselves, it's all entities, because there's always that possibility that there's been some manipulation within the accounts. And there are other significant risks as well. I won't go through all of them because I'm sure that's a bit dull, and especially if you've already looked at the plans. We've set out our materiality in there, and also how we're going to address those significant risks that I've just been talking about. I've referenced in the audit plans as well a number of consultations which are currently ongoing. All three of them, so that's the National Audit Office, DLUC and also the CIPFA consultations, have all now closed, although we await their findings and what's going to happen as a result of those. But they're likely to have an impact on the 23-24 audits. So at the moment, we've just referenced the possibility that your audit plan may actually change. And obviously, as more information comes to light, we'll make sure that we discuss it with management, but also come back to yourselves as well and make sure that you're aware of what's actually happening. I've also touched in there as well around the VFM risks. Obviously, our responsibilities aren't just about the statement of accounts, but also around economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and looking at your arrangements in place. So I've referenced that as well. Once we get the prior year auditor's annual report from your current auditor or predecessor auditor, that will actually impact on the planning and the work that we're likely to do, particularly if they've raised any particular issues that we'll obviously need to follow up as part of our 23-24 work. That's pretty much all I was going to say, but I'm more than happy to take any questions should you have any.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Border.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. Alex, I just wanted, obviously, we and a number of other local authorities are a bit behind in our audit processes, as you know, and here we're very keen to catch up as soon as possible. Have you got the resources in order to ensure that the audit can be carried out in an expeditious fashion?
That's certainly the plan. Obviously, it will depend very much on what happens to your the 22-23 audit, and actually how that's finalised. And obviously, that's subject to, as I say, some of the consultations that have just finished, because obviously the proposal is, I'm sure you're probably aware, that the any of the outstanding 22-23 audits and prior year audits, and there are quite a few clients that have actually got prior year audits open, their audits will be disclaimed. In effect, that's just putting an opinion on the accounts, basically saying we can't really give assurance on any of the figures in the accounts. And that obviously then impacts on ourselves, because we then have to look at not only just the 23-24 audit, but also consider things like opening balances, how we get those assurances on your prior year that we won't have from your predecessor external auditor. So we're going to do our best to catch up, but I think it very much depends on what the outcome of these consultations is, and what actually work that we actually need to do in order to comply with the auditing standards. And get to a position to give an opinion on 23-24. But we certainly would like to catch up, because I mentioned at the beginning, I've done audit for a long time, and actually missing deadlines, statutory deadlines, was always a bit of a no-no, and nobody wants to be in that position where actually those deadlines continue to be missed, because it's not just an issue for yourselves, but it has an issue for us as well. It creates additional work. It's not great for morale. It doesn't give you any assurance. It doesn't give your stakeholders any assurance. So we're going to do our best to actually hit those deadlines. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That's a very full answer. I heard all of the standard disclaimers in there, but I also heard that you're going to do your very best as well. So that's what I'm hanging my hopes on.
Thank you. Any other questions? No?
Just are there sort of default dates in the plan in terms of your expectation that EY presumably will finally complete it at such and such a date? And I know that might not be firm, but at least have a plan that you can make your plan on.
So the default dates are set out were set out in the DLUC consultation. So for the 22-23 set of accounts and anything prior, which I appreciate doesn't actually affect you, my understanding is that the disclaimed opinion has to be given by the 30th of September this year. And then there's a series of deadlines going forward, should entities, because there will be some audits where basically the auditors will run out of road, in effect, to actually give an opinion. So there are a series of deadlines that have actually been set out. But as I say, that's subject to consultation. And obviously then, because they're statutory deadlines, they will have to go through due process from a legislative perspective. I think we're all keeping our fingers crossed that that'll be sorted out before the summer recess. But we'll kind of wait and see, because otherwise that's just going to push everything back. So that's the plan anyway at the moment.
Right. Well, thank you for that. So that you'll be there to receive the baton if it's delivered on time.
Yes, hopefully.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, I think I think we can sort of end this item and just say thank you very much for attending the meeting and giving us this update, really. And look forward to seeing you again soon and hearing some updates.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're going to stay for the rest of the meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Very welcome to.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Right. Okay. So we're going to move on to number 8, which is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act annual review. And Pat Connell is online. There she is. Hi, Pat. So I'll just hand over to you to introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 provides a framework for investigatory techniques to ensure they're used in a way that's compatible with Article 8, the right to respect for private and family life, enshrined in the European Convention for Human Rights. RIPA ensures these techniques are used in a regulated way and provides safeguards against their abuse. The use of covert techniques will only be authorised if considered legal, necessary or proportionate. And to date, neither council has used covert surveillance techniques. There have been no requests to use those. Currently, the investigation the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office carried out a remote inspection in 2021 and made some suggestions to the councils. They were generally satisfied with the compliance by both councils with RIPA. And earlier this year in March, they requested, by means of a questionnaire, confirmation that those recommendations had been considered, taken on board, and how we were continuing to comply with RIPA. And we responded in March to that. And on the 25th of March 24, the Chief Executive received a letter saying that the Commissioner was satisfied with both councils' compliance with both RIPA 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, which primarily deals with communications data, and that there would be no further inspection this year. The next scheduled inspection will be in 2027. And bear with me. So therefore, I'd like to ask the committee to consider the report and agree the recommendations when you've done so.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, so the recommendations are on page 3 of our packs there. So they're in 5 parts. But yeah, has anybody got any questions for Pat, first of all? That's a order.
Pat, thanks very much for that introduction. It's very full papers. As I'm sure you're aware, the thought of surveillance gives anyone with any libertarian blood in their body sort of a panic attack. I'm very pleased to hear there's been no need for covert surveillance. You obviously talked about the fact that they were generally satisfied, and obviously things are going reasonably well. But have there been any specific instances where either of the two councils have been under investigation or pressure because of their surveillance technique?
No, not at all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Dragonetti.
Oh, yes. Does this encompass planning enforcement?
It basically, RIPA doesn't provide the councils with power to do something that they're not already empowered to do. So yes, any enforcement that we carry out under any other legislation, under that legislation, we're able to carry out certain surveillance, usually overt. But if we were to want to carry out some covert surveillance, then there are processes in place to make a request to do so. And it would be considered whether it was indeed legal, necessary and proportionate before that was approved.
Yeah, I have a case in my ward where a building was being used for residential purposes without planning consent. And the enforcement officer told me they couldn't use a drone because it wasn't compliant with GDPR or something, and reflecting this unlawful occupation, the residents in this unlawful occupation, infringing their rights. Was that actually correct?
Drones are a new area for us as the two councils. We haven't yet purchased, as I understand it, any drones. And before we do so, we would have a new policy put in place and some training of officers to ensure that any surveillance was done correctly by use of those drones. But it's part of all the changes that are coming along. We've taken on board body video cameras, which I think the waste team are using. There's been a procedure put in place for that, again, to ensure that the process not abused.
Yes. I presume that you're aware that you only need to occupy a building for 4 years for residential use to be established. And that's seems to be happening now all across, certainly in South Oxfordshire. And it's rather some blows up snook at the planning system and our planning policies if we don't actually address these issues promptly.
So that issue, am I right in thinking, Pat, that wouldn't necessarily come under this wouldn't come under the RIPA? There would be a different process to deal with that.
It would be considered whether it was covert surveillance and whether RIPA would apply, but whatever it was decided at the time, there would be a need for a new process to be put in place and some training given before we used it. So I appreciate it's new technology, and it's something that potentially RIPA could be part of the process of using it, make sure it's done properly, but we're not there yet, I think is the answer.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner, did you have a question?
Yes, partly theoretical question about not about covert surveillance, but overt surveillance. Someone complains about a noise, a level of noise, let's say, and as I have read this, it says that that recording the sound might be might raise issues around RIPA, but not if the noisemaker is warned that recording will happen. So this is at this point, a more generic question. When something like that, when action like that is going to be taken, for example, going and recording noise, it also says that the potential offender is warned. There's a perception that warning them means we'll be along tomorrow or in a couple of days' time, which might well lead to a quiet period. There's also reference here to policies and procedures. Do the policies and procedures make any stipulation about how long a warning lasts? That's probably the simplest way. Because if I was looking at, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was only going to say, I think it's a question of what's reasonable. There will indeed be some examples elsewhere in case law that suggests how long that might be. I think it's down to the officers concerned. There is a policy, or rather a procedure they follow, which in essence is to make sure that the person who's carrying out this noise or creating it is given warning. I think I entirely take the point about how long, but it's how long how long is considered by the officers and their managers as is reasonable, I think, and if it's a repeat offence.
So there's nothing specific in the policies and procedures other than that it be reasonable.
That's my understanding.
Oh,
I can follow that up if you like and come back to you.
I'm interested because there, certainly in the case I can think of, there's a perception among people who are affected in a particular case that the council don't really care, because every time they go and listen, if you like, they've just been warned, so obviously they keep quiet.
That's obviously not the intended outcome. So I think it would come down to what is reasonable in circumstances. But in each case, that might be different. There's a variety of in each case, we've got to act reasonably. I think that's the bottom line. But I can check with the officers and that procedure and come back to you.
Thank
you. Yes. Is he writing there? Pat, hello, Pat. Mike Boone, I'm independent member on the committee. I was interested in the strategic objectives and the wider context of this, because if surveillance is going to be used, then I can think of a number of reasons why they would be. One being fraud, and if you're doing it in investigation of fraud, then you're protecting money and taxpayers' money and so on. But that's not referred to in the strategic objectives. And to me, surveillance actually sits within a wider strategy of fraud management. You any thoughts on that?
I think the view is that anything that the councils are able to deal with under other legislation can involve potentially surveillance, either overt or covert, in which case RIPA would apply. So I think there might be an instance where the fraud team did have an issue and did want to use some covert or other technique, and if so doing, they would have to make an application to an authorising officer, and that would then have to be considered as to whether it's legal, necessary and proportionate. Those are the key elements each time. So you have to consider each request on its merits.
So yes, and I get that, you know, this is making sure that the councils are RIPA compliant, but it's in danger of being a very good. I mean, with no use of surveillance, and I understand that we only want to use surveillance when necessary, but with no use of it, there's a potential that this is a fantastic MOT report, but the cars never left the driveway.
That's an interesting analogy. I think each team and each head of service is currently within the policy able to be an authorising officer. In fact, the new training that will be happening very shortly with Cornerstone Chambers will address the sorts of options and issues and when surveillance of a covert nature might be applicable, and that might be one. It's to date the councils haven't used it. I think that's all I can say, and I'm not saying that it's not something they'd consider in the right circumstances. I think there's a need for further training, and that's what we're putting in place. And at the minute, the current authorising officer from the previous training round is only Andrew Down. There are going to be, obviously we've had a lot of changes at head service level, so there will be new officers who will be named as authorising officer on the basis that if the committee, that is, agrees to allow the head of service, head of legal and democratic to make small changes to the policy and procedure. And that would be, following the training, we would ensure that others were properly trained and able to take that role, and therefore be able to disseminate to their teams how it might be used.
Okay, well, it may be that my question shouldn't be directed to you, Pat, really, just in terms of understanding, you know, there's an anti-fraud policy and anti-fraud team and so on in the council. So, okay, yeah. Thank you for that, Pat.
That's okay.
Yeah. Can I just chip in on that?
Yeah.
And to answer the question directly, I mean, there is certainly within finance as a specific counter-fraud team. One of the things listening to Pat and listening to the conversation is, if I think back to when I first arrived here 16 years ago, there was a lot probably of covert surveillance that actually doesn't need to take place now because of the way technology and things have moved on. So I think that probably is a factor as well in all this, the tools we have as officers, you know, to avoid actually, you know, being out in the fields doing surveillance has moved on quite significantly.
Councillor Morgan, you have a question?
Yeah, I think it continues on from sorry, excuse me, from Mike's point, which is it appears to be an option available to us, but we don't think we need to use it, and we haven't used it very often. How does that compare to peer group councils? I mean, obviously, certain other councils will have different responsibilities, but for councils of our type, how does our record of using covert surveillance compare to others?
In all honesty, I can't answer that. We haven't necessarily done that comparison, and I think it's been what our management teams considered to be reasonable in its use or otherwise. And I think there have been changes in how we view the different tools available to us now. This new training that is about to happen will make clear to all heads of service and SMT generally what the options are and it's for them to consider whether it's appropriate for us to use it.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I mean, the two that leapt to mind, and it says about sales. Are we responsible for sales of cigarettes, tobacco and vapes, or is that just the county council? That's one question. Two, I know we're responsible for licensing, and have we ever had to use this power in relationship to checking what's happening with a particularly licensed driver as to whether they are or not sticking to the rules of their license? So I can see with that.
So in two questions, you're right. Licensing, perhaps the you mentioned cigarettes, that would be trading standards. Licensing generally, obviously, sale of liquor to underage people, that would sit with us as well, because we have, depending what whether it's a licensed facility that's selling the alcohol rather than a shop, that would sit with us. The question of whether we consider using it in terms of taxi drivers and the equivalent, I think the answer to that is we have CCTV, but we haven't used covert surveillance with taxi licensing, is my understanding. It's something that I think, again, is being considered in all of the sort of round of things now as to what the training would be and how people would take that forward. But we do have different procedures in place for all our overt surveillance, but not covert in licensing matters.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that we've had a particularly large sample around our area because of the shutting of the bridge. We've had several reports of people being charged £35, £40 to go a fairly short distance into the city because they're having to go around the ring road. Yeah. And that's extremely difficult to justify. And when you ask the taxi drivers, they're all saying, oh no, we charge £15, £20 maximum. And yet constantly we're getting residents saying that that's not what they were charged. So something like that's very difficult to substantiate without actually having somebody being charged the wrong fare. And certainly the liquor, the reason I asked about that is if we don't have much experience in it, selling to underage people would require somebody who's under the age of 18. And do we have in place safeguarding procedures for those characters? Because obviously you're using somebody who's a minor, and that in itself gives us a safeguarding role in that operation.
It does indeed, and we have not ever used that as, we've not used underage people in that way. That's not, it is exactly what RIPA's there to protect against, and that's for any young person, there has to be a specific request, and that's not been authorised. We've not used the powers in that way.
So in terms of the licensing issues that you just raised, I suppose, so the best thing to do would be to raise it with the licensing team, and then if they felt that there was a need to go down the RIPA route, then they would follow the procedure to consider whether it was appropriate or not. And I suppose once you've got the training rolled out and there's more people aware that this is an option, I'm just thinking aloud really whether we might see a few more applications to use it come forward, because if more people are aware of it, then people might kind of want to go, oh, actually, could we use it for this, and sort of test it out a bit. Councillor Skinner, do you want to come in?
Well, I was just really just thinking maybe what we need to do is publicise more what the rules that cover taxis and journeys are, so that people, if they're charged an unreasonable amount. I mean, I have only one experience of an Oxford taxi in the entire time I've been here, and it constituted arriving on a Saturday and on a Sunday and saying how much to take me to Abingdon, and the guy said £15, and off we went and put the meter on, and I said to him, why have you put the meter on? Oh, well, see how much it's going to be. And I said, it's £15, you told me. And he said, no, I'm putting the meter on. Here's the police station. We'll stop here. I said, excellent. Stop right here and we'll sort it. And he brought me to Abingdon, but I've not bothered with a Oxford taxi since, I'm afraid. But people, I mean, that is, if you're, people should be empowered with the knowledge of what their rights are, and that's probably better than getting into surveillance, I would think. And I used to know what the London rules were, but I actually had no idea what the rules are for taking a taxi here.
So that's probably something that needs to be raised with the taxi licensing teams and their policies and procedures, rather than under this report specifically, because obviously, but as I mentioned before, I think that once there's more awareness that this is an option or how to use it appropriately, it'd be interesting to see if there's some sort of test cases in a way, new ideas of how it could be used and whether that we feel that that's appropriate or not.
Although this is a tool to investigate fraud, and it's the covert surveillance that you might be using, but there actually needs to be an understanding of the potential level of fraud and how much is being detected. I'm just thinking from the front, and if you know that, then you might know whether or not the fact that there's been no use of surveillance whatsoever might be it might be because there's been no need. It might be that nobody's actually aware and is picking up on issues.
Okay.
But I think we would need to be very, very careful about using surveillance when there wasn't a proven need for it.
Absolutely.
Going back to my opening remarks, I think surveillance should be avoided at all costs whenever possible. So I don't think we should be looking for opportunities to use it. We should only be using it where there's a clear case where it will be helpful in terms of necessary enforcement.
Yeah.
Do you think that it should be preventing fraud and detecting fraud on the council's money?
Of course.
So in terms of, like you've mentioned, Simon, the fraud team work anyway, is this, I'm assuming this is something that can be raised when we're looking at fraud more generally as well.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to my training.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for all the questions. Thank you, Pat, for all the answers. So I'm going to move to the recommendations then. So that's the border.
Can I make a point about the recommendations, which particularly E, where we says authorises the head of legal and democratic to make such changes as she may consider necessary from time to time. I'm very much against having blanket clauses like this. I recognise it's only to ensuring ongoing compliance with 2000 Act, etc. But if there are changes being made to policy and procedures, which is our it's our responsibility to monitor. I think that any changes should at least be introduced to the joint heads of this joint chairs of this committee.
Can I just make a comment? I don't know whether Pat might contradict me or not, but my reading of E is more administrative. So I think it would be more around adding and deleting heads of service. If the code is if there's a new version of RIPA, we'd have to change the references to the correct act or the regulations. So I don't think this would authorise wholesale changes to what you're agreeing now. I think this is more administrative. Pat, would that be correct?
That's certainly the intention, yes. It's minor changes. For example, as we've just said, there's going to be training. We've currently only got one nominated and named authorised officer. We need more. And although the heads of service all have the delegation within the Constitution, they need the training before they could be named in the policy and procedure. So therefore, it's that sort of change that this is intended to deal with.
Could we change the wording of the recommendation slightly to make it clearer?
I think if we were to add to make such administrative changes to policy and procedures, that might help.
Make minor administrative changes.
It's one of those things where actually I really do trust the officers here.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's a question of making sure that we don't open a gate which someone might go through by mistake. That's all.
Yeah. So so I just when you were talking, Councillor Porter, I just scribbled to make minor administrative changes.
Yeah.
Would that be? Do you think that would be okay?
Fine by me.
Is that okay with you, Pat? Just to make it really clear that that's the type of changes, and obviously if there was a larger, more significant change, then we would want it to come back to the committee, or at least to the co-chairs to discuss whether it should come back. Thank you very much. Councillor Roberts.
when it says consider and note the council's use and compliance with RIPA, I wonder whether under consider we could add using good practice from our I could say local councils, but yes, the Oxfordshire councils, because I'm sure that the other districts and the county have some experience in this area, and maybe getting all of them together and looking at what the new tools are that are available and how they should be used, and gaining good practice from the whole team. I don't know.
In terms of the recommendation, I'm not sure we need to change it because we have just done that, really, haven't we? Because we've considered and noted the use and we've had the report and the update. So I'm not sure we need to change the wording of the recommendation. I think it was Councillor Morgan, I think, that mentioned about peer councils and whether the fact that we haven't used it is that kind of normal. So perhaps that's more of a kind of informal kind of suggestion that we look at peer councils and just sort of see how we're sort of complying, and as the training goes through as well, and we're developing new policies in the different service areas and things, that we just sort of take account of peer councils and any good practice that's out there, which I'm sure officers would do anyway, but just, you know, to sort of flag that.
I'm happy to take that away as something that we should be doing.
Yeah.
I think my point was just if other councils of a similar nature identify loss that maybe we haven't found, then we ought to then use that learning.
Yeah, definitely. And if everybody else is the same, then it's kind of reassuring in a way that we're probably, you know, okay. And if everybody else is using it loads, then we might want to have another look.
Well, having been on the committee at county, I know that the answer to that was it comes in batches depending on a certain thing that's going on within the area.
Right.
And that, you know, so in one year they might have 20 and next year they might have 3.
Yeah.
Because there's an investigation that's rolling about a particular fraud.
In that case then, so I'd like to take a vote on the recommendations. So basically the recommendations I'm going to propose are as written on the paper, although point E will now say will authorise the head of Legal and Democratic to make minor administrative changes. So with that amendment, I'd like to propose that. Could I have a second, Peter Dragon, I think? And is everybody happy to accept those recommendations? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Pat. And that is all those recommendations are accepted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we'll move on next to the internal audit plan, and I think Victoria is joining us online to introduce this item.
Yes, good
Hi,
evening.
Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everyone. Yes, this report sets out the internal audit plan for 24-25. It's a 12-month plan, but as with last year, it will remain flexible to any changes in risks, priorities throughout the year. I'll also formally review the plan in September with input from SMT as our midpoint in the year. The plan has been arrived at based on a number of factors, including risk profile, time since areas were last audited, heads of service feedback, to just name a few. There's a mixture of key financial audit and advisory work in there. And I've also reviewed the top 10 corporate risks on our risk registers and ensured that we have suitable internal audit coverage this year. There's various different appendices. The main body is setting out the background and how we arrived at the plan. And then there's various different appendices with the actual plan itself on Appendix 4. I'm happy to take any questions on the detail.
Thanks, Victoria. So does anyone have any questions? Councillor Skinner.
I've written down on page 46, there is a 4-letter word which is either LDocs or IDocs.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes,
and I have no idea what it means.
I'm guessing it's a new IT program. But
yeah. So IDocs is the new IT system for planning services. Is that right, Victoria?
That's correct. Yeah, there's a new system coming in, which planning use and a number of other services, I believe, but primarily planning. That's the name of the new system.
Yeah, thank you.
Is it possible to know what it does in sort of not more than 20 words? Please say no.
Probably not.
Not in 20 words.
I just wondered if we could have that added to the report because I didn't know what it was either.
No, I
I guess because
Yeah.
of the one it was taking over from. But at least then if we had some reference to it and a member of the public wants to look this up, they might actually have some idea if it's IDOCS brackets new planning.
Yeah,
IT.
that's something we could do in the
Software.
future if there's a sort of name of software.
So
If we
not
could just put a little
definitely going to
descriptor in the report so that we've so that members of the public and councillors.
I think, Chair, that Victoria was very honest. If I'd been her, I'd have said it does exactly the same as the old one, but better.
I remain independent on that.
Exactly. I just noticed in one category, so you've got your hands up. Did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, because IDOCS is actually replacing Ocella, which is the old system that we've used for a long time, which has been actually purpose built and derived from all our service teams' requirements. So IDOCS is a new system because Ocella will be no longer available after next couple of years, and so we have had to replace Ocella with IDOCS, and IDOCS isn't bespoke, which means we have to review our processes across a number of service teams to work with this new system of IDOCS, and it's basically about being flexible and resilient because IDOCS is where we need to be going forward. And that's why at this stage it's a bit painful, as in that's why it's on there as there's 2 risks actually on the register regarding IDOCS. And that's the reason why it's there at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that. That's really helpful. Councillor Dragonetti.
How many other local authorities our sort of size use IDOCS?
I can't answer that question. They do. There are other councils that do use IDOCS because they've been doing lots of benchmarking with other councils. But I'm not an expert in that area. Just to have an overview, I'd have to go away and ask the question.
So have we? Sorry, let's go back. Have we sort of installed a sort of test version of it? So I mean, is there a development program going through for installation?
Yes, there is a test program and a development program, and they're piloting it in. That's why they're doing it in. They're bringing in planning first, then environmental health, before it goes out to other parts of the council. So it is actually there is a planned testing and pilot for this software, which is ongoing at the moment.
We might want to we might want to pick out some of the other things and the risk. Just when we get to the risk item later on in the agenda in a bit more detail. But obviously for this item, we need to be kind of focusing on the internal audit plan, and if we're happy with the plan that's been proposed, that Victoria and all her colleagues sort of focus on over the next year. So has anyone got any other questions around the plan that's being proposed? That's Morgan.
Yeah, just are there any areas that, just because of the constraints in the amount of resource you have, you think, well, I'd quite like to have done that, but I'm not able to within the resources we have?
I think this year there's a lot more on my sort of reserve list, as I call it. So I think, and that's mainly due to the volume of work that we're actually doing as 2 councils. I think that's not necessarily due to our resourcing in the team, but we're just doing so much more compared to when I first joined in 2018. There's so much that we could audit. So in terms of that, I've had to prioritise the top risks and make sure the other areas that we're not auditing, maybe as a full audit this year, that we're either on a programme board or that we know what's going on. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm looking into the plan. Yes, formally every 6 months, but in reality a lot more regularly than that. So in reality there are a lot of topics we would love to cover, but due to the fact that we're a relatively small team, we do have to make it practical as well. But yeah, there's lots of other topics that we could have looked at this year.
Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, you have some of the limited highlighted, presumably because they were done in the last, or they're allocated to be done in this coming year, or last year. Are we going back to revisit some of the older limited audit responses and slowly working through them, or not? Because there's quite a lot of limiteds that are just taking anti-fraud and corruption policies, since we were talking about that, was done in 2014-15, and that was limited. And there's no head of service request. But is that coming to part of your assessment as to whether we should go and audit them or not? Sorry, I got to the question in the end.
Yep, so let me just see which appendices that's on. So the audit universe on Appendix 2 is where I set out all the possible audit topics that I could look at. And that's where I had my subjective view of the risk score, the risk profile for each area. So based on, legal, operational, those types of risks. So I do score each of the areas, and that's one of the factors that I look at along with when we last audited it. But obviously, related to the previous question, we then have to really prioritise what we're going to look at, given that we're a small team. So there are areas that maybe we haven't looked at in a while, that we just simply can't cover because other things sort of float up higher up the list, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I've answered your question there.
Yeah, I think so, because probably basically the answer is that you don't have the resources to go through all of those. But I did wonder whether, in the light of, say, maybe other things we're looking at, if something bubbles up, that we go, oh yeah, we haven't looked at that for a while. Because I remember with health and safety, that hadn't been looked at for a very long time. When we did look at it, it requires a lot of looking at. So, I think maybe things like that, where technology changes have happened.
That's what I've set out to do with the plan this year, is really try and look at the things that either haven't been looked at in a while and score quite highly, to make sure we're looking at the real critical things. However, if there's anything that you as councillors see that you think, oh, I'd really like to look at that, then that's your opportunity to let me know. And as I say, that the plan isn't set in stone, it can change, it is flexible. I'm just looking at what I feel at the moment should be our priority areas. But if there is anything that is of concern, you do have the opportunity to discuss that and see if that needs to be added to the plan.
One thing that's sort of slightly politically sensitive is our new office building. Are you going to cover that in your audit? I mean, are we get numbers floated around and challenged by other opposition parties, and be quite helpful to be sure that we have confidence in what our that new office team are information they're giving out.
I think we made the decision that at the moment there's not really anything for us to audit as like a formal audit. However, the way I do keep in the loop with what's going on is part of our statutory officers meetings that I attend every month. So that's how I keep my my eyes and ears open on that project. But at the moment, I think we made the decision that there's nothing really to kind of formally audit at this stage as such. But it is something I'm aware of and in the loop on.
Yeah, thank you. That's comforting.
Councillor Skinner.
If I could just ask quickly, community centres are something I've got a particular interest in. I see they were last audited 23, 20 or 22, 23, 23, 24, and there's an audit in progress now. Do we have, can I ask to see the last audit report? Is that something? That suggests to me there were issues, and
can I just confirm that's our community centres? So that's that's the ones we own and operate. So that's the Great Western Park ones from memory, isn't it, Victoria?
It is,
I
yeah.
think that's the limit of that audit.
Yeah, well, we own most of them, do we not? We own all the ones in Abingdon, as far as I
They're
know.
on lease though.
Yes, we don't operate.
So we don't
Yeah.
so
No, we don't
our operation. Those
It's
that we
only-
operate.
Yeah. It's only, I think, about 4 in total that audit was looking at, the ones that we own in the Didcot area.
Okay, well,
Only one,
sorry.
yeah.
What's the answer to my general question? Are these reports that councillors have access to, or?
Yeah,
Can
as
have
with
access to
as
them.
with all of our audit reports, once they're finalised, members of the committee will receive a copy at distribution, and then again at the audit committee meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. All right then. So the recommendation before us is that we approve the internal audit plan as set out. As Victoria's mentioned, it's not kind of set in stone forever, and it can change through the year, and there'll be like formal review in 6 months as well. So if there's anything in particular that we feel needs to be added or moved up the list or whatever, we can obviously raise that with Victoria outside the meeting as well, and just sort of flag things up that, you know, and ask questions about that. But bearing that in mind, is committee happy to approve the internal audit plan? So I'd like to propose that we do.
Seconded.
Councillor Ford, just a second. Is everyone else happy to accept that recommendation?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you.
We'll move on to number 10, which is the Code of Corporate Governance, and that's over to Simon.
Thank you. So you'll, as members of this committee, you'll be familiar with the annual governance statement, which is a statutory requirement for councils to prepare and forms part of the statement of accounts that comes forward to this committee for approval. That statement is based on a local code of good governance. Our version, however, is actually based on out-of-date guidance as it stands at the moment. So as such, the local code of corporate governance needs revising. The draft local code is attached as Appendix 1 to the report and is intended to replace the out-of-date one in the council's constitutions and will reflect updated guidance from SIPA. Paragraph 6 on page 57 outlines 7 principles contained in the SIPA guidance, which the local code follows. The committee is requested to review the document to ensure that members are satisfied it accurately reflects the council's governance arrangements in meeting the core principles outlined on page 57. The draft has been considered by the Constitution Review Working Group and, where appropriate, updated in response to views expressed. It is proposed that progress on delivering against the code is reviewed by officers and that this informs future developments of the annual governance statement for consideration by the committee. The committee is asked, therefore, to endorse the revised code and recommend it to each council for adoption and inclusion in the council's constitutions.
Thanks, Simon. Right, has anyone got any questions on this one? I have, but I was going to see if the room had any. So my first question was around, so the Constitution Review Group have had a look at this already before it's come here. Were there any particular changes that or discussions that you wanted to highlight that came up there? Was there any particular changes that were made as a result of?
I'm not aware of them because I wasn't involved in the process of taking the paper through the review working group. I'm looking at Darius though.
But we have a chair of the Constitution.
Councillor Border. Am I allowed to ask Councillor Border a question though? That's putting you on the step somewhat. But obviously the Constitutional Review Working Group did have a look at it. So
when did we have a look at it?
It was
last year. I think some of the changes were around accessibility of the report and correcting some mistakes. I'm not sure there was any fundamental.
No, I don't
changes.
think so. I was looking through the statements of principle, and they were pretty familiar actually. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So generally, yeah. Obviously, the group.
I don't recall. I don't recall that there were any difficulties about it. They were, and I think. Actually, the update is to be welcomed.
Brilliant. And the other question I had was, I think it's good. I think it's the right principles, and I'm sort of personally happy to support it today. If we're not compliant with some of them, how does that get flagged up? Or if members, for example, had concerns that we weren't compliant with some of them?
I think in the first instance, that's a conversation to go with the monitoring officer. I think that the relevant member should raise that with the monitoring officer for review. Beyond that, it's difficult to think of a specific example, but yeah, that'd be the right approach.
Okay. All right. Not that I've got major concerns, but I was just thinking through the process. Okay, in that case, is there any other questions? Sorry, before I move on to recommendation. Hogging all the question time there. We need to, so the recommendations that we recommend, the revised local code of conduct is adopted by each council for inclusion in the council's constitution. Now, I'm right in thinking that this doesn't go to council, it's something that the Joint Audit and Governance Committee approves, is that right?
It goes
Or
to
it goes
council.
council to
It does go to
sorry, I'm
council.
getting
This would be
confused
a
about the process.
recommendation to each council.
Okay,
Yeah,
so this
so
is a
it's
recommendation to each council, then the council will consider it, but we need to take separate votes because obviously we've got two councils. So to get started, I'll propose that for the Vale members of the committee that we vote to recommend, we support the recommendation to recommend the revised code is adopted by our council. So I'll propose that. Councillor Spord is second. Is every Vale member happy? Yeah, lovely. So Vale is accepted that recommendation.
And I'd
South.
like to propose that South accepts the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. And then
I'm pleased to second that.
that's good. and I take it you are unanimous. Lovely. Okie doke. Thank you very much. So that's
Thank you, Chair.
accepted for both councils. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so now we'll move on to item 11, update on statement of accounts. And this one's Simon as well.
I mean, nicely swerved the fact that the agenda actually talks about 22-23, but the report tells about 23-24, but I'm going to cover both.
Okay.
So this is a sort of it's a lengthy introduction, so bear with me. You've already heard tonight from Alex from Bishop Fleming that the government has been consulting on implementation of a backstop date for all councils to publish their audited accounts by the 30th of September for all years outstanding up to including 22-23. There are two other consultations, as Alex referred to. One was specifically looking at, aimed primarily at the auditors issued by the National Audit Office in terms of how auditors were going to process this, and one produced by SIP on potential code simplification to alleviate matters going forward. These all closed in March, and we have no update on the outcomes of those yet. As you're aware, for both councils, accounts up to and including 2021-22 have been signed off as complete and finished and audited and done. It's getting very confusing which year we're in at the moment in terms of this, but for 22-23 draft accounts, they have been published on our websites. EY have begun auditing them, and we'll come back to the next committee with progress next time. However, as was alluded to earlier on, they are unlikely to do a full audit by the 31st of September, and they will therefore likely issue an opinion on what they've been able to complete, and what they haven't been able to undertake will be disclaimed, as referred to earlier. There are some elements that they have to work on in any event, such as the value for money work, and that is what they are concentrating on at the moment. So that's where we are with 22-23. For 23-24, they, as you know, will be the first accounts to be audited by Bishop Fleming, who we heard from earlier on. Currently, the deadline for the drafted 23-24 accounts remains the 31st of May. This remains a challenging deadline and is of itself the subject of a question in the consultation as to whether that deadline was realistic or should be changed. We are looking, as it says in the report, to aspire to hit the 31st of May deadline, but we will not publish the accounts until they have been thoroughly reviewed and checked, and that could take us till the end of June. The 23-24 accounts themselves will see little in the way of substantive change from those presented for 22-23. And that is why the draft accounting policies included in the report for approval by each council are effectively unchanged from 22-23. However, looking ahead to the following year's accounts, 24-25, we'll see the long heralded introduction of the new leasing standard IFRS 16. This means that we need accounts practices in place from 1st of April 2024 in respect of leases, and those practices are spelled out in paragraph 21 on page 92. Whilst we are still working through the implications of the new leases standards, we do not at this stage believe it will have any material implication for the councils, though compliance with the standard will increase the work of the teams in preparing the accounts. And I know with previous discussions at this committee have focused on the amount of extra work that the leases standard introduces to councils. The committee is therefore asked to note the progress on the 23-24 accounts, note the forthcoming lease accounting requirements, and approve for each council the revised statement of accounting policies that will apply to the 23-24 accounts. If you followed which I was talking about, you did better than me.
Can I just clarify, because I think I followed it, but I could be wrong. With the changes to the leasing, that's not in the.
It won't be in 23-24, but it
So
actually.
there's very little change in terms of the actual policy.
Yeah.
It will be next year.
That's right.
That's when the policy needs more significant update in terms of the leasing.
That's correct. But obviously, because we're now in 24-25, the team needs to follow the new rules for next year, even though they're not going to form part of the accounts for last year, which they're just about to prepare.
So we don't need to approve the policies around that yet, but obviously it's good to hear that the officer team are, and Bishop Fleming as well, all aware of it and working on it and preparing. Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think I'm in the right years. So does anyone have any questions?
And how much and how many assets do we have under leases? And why do we use leases rather than, as we've got strong cash reserves? Why are we doing?
So there's two issues with leases. There's first of all the leases that we actually have ourselves, and we actually don't have that many.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge we have is implicit leases in some of our arrangements. So the obvious one. The obvious one, for example, would be waste vehicles in the waste contract. So it's those sorts of areas where we're having to do some work to identify whether they're in scope and understand all that. But you're absolutely right. The number of leased items we have is minimal. That said, we still have to account for them to the full extent of IFRS 16 as required.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Reclassification is always a terrible thing to have to do, isn't it?
Okay. So are there any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, on the accounts which the EY are finalising now, which then will give the opening balances for the 23-24. Are there likely to be any? Are you aware of any sort of issues between those the EY work that will affect those opening balances?
So where we stand as it stands at the moment, as Alex alluded to earlier on, we're working on the assumption that the 30th of September is the deadline. It's not clear to me whether EY, will even look at that or will give some form of look. I mean, there's obviously guidance will come out once the consultation is announced, or the results of consultation will come out. I think we're anticipating some form of guidance, because I don't think we really know. And Alex might chip in if I get this wrong, but I don't think they've really necessarily explained to us how this process will work if we get to these deadlines. But you're absolutely right. I think the challenge which we're very mindful of is a disclaimed set of accounts for 22-23 is fine until the next auditor comes up and tries to work out whether the opening balances are correct. And that's the bit I think is unclear, certainly in my head, is the extent to which if the 22-23 accounts are disclaimed, how much the incumbent new auditor, in our case, is going to be expected to still effectively audit them anyway to be able to do their work.
Yes.
And I think that's the bit that's still unclear in my head. Because if they have to, because all it's then done is effectively changed whoever's audited the auditor. The auditor of those numbers has just changed. We still end up with them being audited.
Yes.
There was some talk at one point that potentially future sets of accounts could be audited apart from the opening balances. So we're happy that everything from day one was fine, but we'll just disclaim the opening balances, but we just don't think it's practical.
No.
So I think this opening balance question is probably one of the key ones that needs to be resolved. And as I said, we've only got 6 months to resolve it. And that's
Apart
the
from the
challenge.
pensions, nightmare thinking. I the opening balance is all pretty well, there's nothing to dispute about them.
I think
the facts are not.
So there's two aspects really. One is pensions, the other one is fixed assets. And that's the one where the SITFA consultation was actually specifically focused on those two, and almost trying to reduce the amount of work that needed to be done, or reduce the scope, I suppose, of challenging some of the valuations by giving more scope for, in the case of fixed assets, for example, using indices. I think it's very difficult because I think those are the biggest numbers in our balance sheet, the value of our assets and the value of our pension liability.
Yes.
They are the numbers, certainly in terms of assets. There are plenty of stories out there of, one set of values agreeing one number and the auditor ones agreeing another number, and no one, we don't meet in the middle.
Yes.
And that's where the challenge is, and I think that's where the challenge will continue to be. But it's those numbers that would worry me from a what do we like to be disclaimed on. There are a whole raft of numbers. So, debtors and creditors, for example, well, there will be a debtors and creditors report from the ledger and the associated backup. So those numbers, I'm not too sure. Those will be fairly easy to prove.
Yes.
The challenge will be these big balances that are very subjective, the fixed assets and the pensions.
All to do with subjective valuations.
Absolutely.
Either one way or the other, liabilities or assets.
Councillor Roberts, did you have a question?
I had a different question. This change on leasing and it's coming in from 25-26 onwards.
24-25.
24-25.
Yeah.
That probably makes it worse. My question based on the fact that the contracts that will probably apply to most is GL and waste. And both of those, I think, will be coming up for re-tendering in 25-26. So you're going to have to go through and make all those changes for the contracts. And then the next year, it's going to be a different contract.
Yeah.
That presumably is quite a high workload. And are we contemplating putting something in place to cope with that? Because it's not just going to be 1 year high workload, it's going to be 2 years.
So, I mean, there's a general point here, which is one of my issues with this all along, is that actually we're talking a lot about how the accounts are overcomplicated, impenetrable to readers, and yet we're adding this to it.
Which is going to make it worse.
Yeah. So that's one of my, and in fact, when I replied to the DLUC consultation, I said, why are we still making? We already acknowledge we've got a problem, yet we're still making the accounts worse. So, but I think all the people I've spoken to said that this is happening. So just get on with it. Was the general gist of it. But in answer to your question, I mean, what we have done, and we've alluded to it in the report, is we have 3 additional resources in strategic finance to pick up, the getting the accounts done. Getting the accounts through the audit last year was a longer process than we've experienced before. We were also looking to improve our management accounting function, so we've taken on 3 additional people. One of those people has gone into the financial accounting side. Actually, has come from an authority where they were doing the leases work, prep work as well. So I think we are much better placed to do the IFRS 16 work than we were before. So I hear what you say and I agree with you, but I think and it's frustrating, but we are in a better place than we were.
Yes, I mean, I probably knew something about the place you were in before and I was worried.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. All right then. So if we can move on then to the recommendations. So we need to note the progress, note the forthcoming account requirement, and to approve the revised statements of accounting policies. Now, there's one for each council here again. So we're going to need to take a vote on separate councils again. The recommendations that are set out there, part A, B and C, I would like to propose that for Vale, that we accept all of those recommendations.
Seconded.
Councillor Ford has seconded. Is everybody in agreement from Vale? Yeah. And South, would anyone like to do the same for South?
I'd like to propose that we accept those recommendations.
Thank you.
Will you please second them?
And are you happy to vote in support of them?
I think we will.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon, for that update and all the work. And yeah, good luck to Echo. The Dragonetti's comment. Okay, so next we've got the work programme as item 12. Darius, did you want to say anything about the work programme?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So it starts on page 131, and the next meeting is outlined on the 2nd of July, where we have the Code of Conduct annual report for 23-24, internal audit annual report for 23-24, and the internal audit update report Q1 24-25. Not much change since the last time we've seen this, so that's probably where I'll stay there unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Has anyone got any questions or comments on the work programme?
Just remind committee that we've off the back of an expectation that the 30th September with a backstop for the 23-24, no, 22-23 audit. We have a committee specifically on the 26th of September to consider where the audit has got to and sign off. And that'll just be for that. And then obviously the 15th of October is the business that would have been on that date, but we've pushed back. But that's why we've got two meetings in quick succession. One is to deal with the 22-23, whatever, assuming that 30th of September is the deadline following the consultation, that meeting will deal with those accounts.
Okay, so we may potentially need to shift the dates around slightly, but hopefully we won't need to. I just had a quick question about the terms of reference for this committee that are coming in October, about the process of how we get there, really. And yeah, has there been any thought yet about how we're going to do that review and how members of the committee can get involved? I know it's something that quite a few Vale councillors are interested in, so just wanted to check what the process was, because obviously I'm assuming the idea is in October we would be looking at a recommendation change. So yeah, I was interested in the process of how we get to that change or suggested change.
So myself and Darius will pick that up with Stephen Corrigan, and we'll feed back to you and Mocky as co-chairs what that process will look like.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
I've got a question, Chair, which is the 26th of September might be quite a quick meeting, but the following one looks very, very full. And would it be appropriate to look at maybe bringing something forward? Try and make certain we're not completely overwhelmed at one meeting and underwhelmed at the other one?
It's difficult to say with the statement of accounts because, I mean, there are a raft of procedures we have to go through at that meeting. So it's not necessarily, and it depends how contentious they are. So that meeting can be over quite quickly. It can take some time because there are, as it says, as we've got here, there are 4 things that have to be agreed separately for each council.
Yeah.
I think we could possibly take a view closer to the date. I think we've taken the view historically that we'll only consider statement of accounts on its and the associated papers that go with it on their own, because we've tried to do it with everything else on the agenda and it's not worked.
Yeah.
So I think I note the point. Maybe that's something we'll pick up, Darius, with the co-chairs.
Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely keep that under review, and particularly like with the potential of the dates having to shift around a little bit as well.
The 15th of October looks very, very busy.
It does, yeah. It does. Yeah, we'll keep that under review. We'll catch up with Mocky as well. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, on the statement of accounts, is that how well we've progressed with the budget allocations is reported on? Is it in that statement of accounts?
No, are you thinking of the scrutiny, the outturn report that goes to scrutiny?
I'm never sure whether it's in audit governance or whether it's in scrutiny.
So
various things are put in the budget, aren't they?
Yeah, that's scrutiny.
That's scrutiny, to see how it goes. So it's in the scrutiny report that goes out at the same time.
So yeah, September. Yeah, it's very confusing. Sometimes we're in the same week, but yeah.
And is that called? No, that's called the.
That's the financial outturn report.
Financial outturn.
Okay. All right. So we just need to note the work programme. We need to vote on that, or we can just note it. We've noted it. Oh, Councillor Roberts got a question.
That doesn't really come up in any individual audit, but actually causes quite a lot of trouble every now and again, which is the handover mechanisms when when you're doing the job and then somebody leaves, if they leave very quickly for some reason, the handing over process between one and the other. Now, I know in some audits we used to have that, all their procedures are documented, but sometimes it's something that they're working on, a project that they're working on, they're in the middle of, and if they go, I'm thinking it usually comes up when somebody dies unexpectedly or leaves unexpectedly for some reason, and then it's often causes quite a big trouble between what was going on and how it gets handed over. But I can't see that actually falls into audit, only one audit, but it is part of our governance procedure, and I didn't know where it sat.
Is that? I'm just wondering whether that's risk register.
It's a point that I have raised in the past.
Yeah, so probably risk,
because it isn't on the risk register as such, is it?
I think it is, but we'll perhaps do that. We'll perhaps do that on the next
slide. Should we pick that up? Because the next item is corporate risk register.
Okay,
so we should carry it. I know the risk
I'm actually waiting to pounce.
Because it does, it's one of those things that comes up every now and again, isn't it?
Right, I'm going to move on to number 13, which is corporate risk register. And the reason that this is on the end of the agenda rather than the work programme, as is usually the way, is because there is a confidential risk that we have in our reports. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is to park any questions about that confidential risk to one side for a minute, and focus on the rest of the risk review. And then after we finish looking at all of the rest of the risks and asking any questions that we would like to of Yvonne, who's with us online, then we can move into confidential session to consider the that confidential risk, which is basically it's in confidential because of commercial sensitivity. So just if you could bear that in mind when you're asking questions and comments, that'd be really helpful. But yeah, Yvonne, would you like to introduce this item for us?
Hi everybody. Yes, as you know, this is our half-yearly progress review of the corporate risk registers of both South and Vale. It's compiled, it's a snapshot in time, so things move on even during or just before this meeting. We've had lots of things happening with the risks, obviously. It's a snapshot in time. It's been compiled using our 5-step risk management process. We have collaboration discussions from risk champions at our risk forums, through to heads of service managers, and also project and programme managers, in order to come up with the corporate risks at the corporate risk register review. So just to re-emphasise, it involves lots of people across the council before we start reporting this to you. Currently there are 32 risks on that register. It doesn't seem to move, sort of 31, 32, 30, but it looks like it's moved quite a bit actually from this report. We've got lots of 6 new risks, but we've also managed to mitigate 2, returning 2 to business as usual as within their project service risk registers, and reduced 2 net risk ratings. So the confidential risk is top number 1. We'll talk about that in the confidential session. Any questions?
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay. Has anyone got any questions?
Are we on all the documents here, or the non-confidential documents? Yes. The first one I wanted to talk about, if I may, is on I think it's the Vale Corp RR review, 15th of April. It's got red lines and yellow lines found twice, and it's to do with the increased approaches of homelessness that are unmanageable by the council. And the mitigation, the further mitigation action, if requested, is to consider purchase of more temporary accommodation to be used by singles and couples using the homelessness prevention grant. Now, my concern is that by solving one risk, we may be creating another. And the reason I say this is that I'm not saying that we can't, and we haven't got the ability, but I haven't seen anything so far demonstrate to me the council has the ability to manage a housing stock. In the past, I've seen a risk mitigation that we take advice from what I believe is quite a small housing association in order to cover, I may be wrong on this, in order to cover our lack of expertise. But the owning and management of assets is a classic risk. And I've never seen any analysis that has convinced me, but nor have I seen any analysis that hasn't convinced me either about how well we are mitigating that risk.
Okay. Yeah, Yvonne, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, we're currently purchasing through local authority housing funds, a number of houses. We are increasing our property stock in order to rent out and lease to tenants and obviously homelessness as well. We do have a couple of, I think we've got 2 temporary accommodation houses for homeless people within the districts, which we have successfully managed over the years. We are actually increasing our expertise in this area. We've got SOHA working with us at the moment to manage the LARF housing and the leased MOD properties on our behalf. And we are actually recruiting to that team to increase that expertise so that in 18 months' time, we will have a skill set that is able to manage that housing stock to the best with the reasons and the remits of our council. That's where the mitigation is at the moment. And actually, we have mitigated. Well, we've moved one of the LARF one, the refugee housing risk, back to the service team risk register because it's actually been mitigated at the moment. It's the failure to provide suitable temporary housing. It's risk 75 for Vale for asylum refugees. That's now gone back to the service and project risk register, as it is actually at the moment currently being mitigated or being managed effectively at that level, and it's regularly reviewed.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That's a full and powerful reply.
Before you move on, could I just, I think Simon wanted to comment.
I'm so sorry, Simon. No problem. I was just going to point out that both cabinets this week have taken a paper on housing delivery strategy update and action plan that you might want to have a look at. And you know, any matters arising from that, obviously you can refer those to the relevant portfolio holder or head service.
Fine. Okay.
Sorry. Did capture that before we moved on to the next.
No, that's really helpful. Now, what was I going to say?
Sorry.
Sorry. First of all, what I didn't say at the beginning, I think doing this is a really wonderful thing to do. You know, so I'm not actually against it. But I wonder whether perhaps I'm not sure of the procedure here, whether it should come to either to scrutiny or to this committee in order to look at in more detail to make sure that we are confident that the risks are being managed satisfactorily.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at Darius. It feels scrutiny. Well, obviously the risk come through on the risk report here, but I think the council's administration of the housing feels like something for scrutiny.
Yeah, if it's to do with managing risk, obviously that's very much this committee. Anything more than that in terms of policy, obviously that goes, I think, to scrutiny.
Yeah.
If that helps clarify.
Yeah.
Managing risk,
Yeah.
If it's personnel, it could be this one, won't it? If it's resources.
I imagine that would show up on the risk register, which would come to us.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And it's sort of a value. Well, I mean, one of the issues, and obviously, if you're managing the things you own, is valuation of assets, which seems to fall into this.
It would.
Yeah. I could see that either. I'm just wondering whether I could maybe take an action as well to discuss it further with officers and also the chair of scrutiny, perhaps, to see if they've got plans to look at. I don't know. I'd have to look up whether that's something that's kind of on their work programme, but maybe have a chat with chair of scrutiny and see.
Yes, I've never seen it on the Vale scrutiny, but I'm not on joint scrutiny. So. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, in the south, we are actually about to start construction in Didcot of actually new housing.
Yeah, exactly. So south is in a slightly different slightly different place than Vale on this as well. So yeah, no, it's a really interesting issue, and it's obviously right that it's on the risk register, and right that we're considering it, because it is a change. And like you say, I think it's a really positive thing that we're doing, but obviously we just need to make sure we're doing it in the most sort of sensible way and making sure that it works well.
I can't see that it's on the work plan for scrutiny, but it just a conversation we can have.
Yeah. Okay. So let's we'll take that offline, and we'll have to think about whether it fits into our work programme scrutiny or maybe both.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions or points on the risk register?
Well, I think this is when we might do a joint double act down here, actually, because I think it's 6 months since I first said that I think one of the major risks you face is actually corporate resilience, loss of people, and all that, and that's not actually there. And I remember, if I'm not trying to quote you against yourself here, Simon, but I do remember that you said you were going to have a think about it, and then when the minutes came, you said yes, you were going to have a think about it. But I know you're very busy, so perhaps you haven't had the chance yet. I don't know.
There is a risk.
There is a risk on there. 88 and 90.
88 and 90, which is failure to recruit and retain staff of the right experience and calibre at the right time in certain service teams may result in key projects not being delivered or delayed, increased agency staff costs and poor staff well-being. That's on page 142.
Yeah, got it. Anyway, but that one, I think that does cover it partially. I'm particularly interested in the loss of senior management, or failures of senior management, and as a councillor, I think we should all be very aware that however hard we try, it's very difficult to monitor the performance and the resilience in those circumstances. And it always seems to me that that's where the failure of any organisation, it's sort of a general risk, it's the failure of any organisation normally comes from failure of senior management and making bad strategic decisions. And I was just wondering whether, if only to remind us all, that's something that could be incorporated in the risk register. Unless you're going to tell me it's already there.
So I think that risk we're talking about there, that's in the risk register, is about not being able to not being able to recruit and retain the right people. And I think we picked up when because myself and Yvonne spent quite a lot of time talking about this one, and we flagged up that certain service teams have more of an issue than others. But I think what you're alluding to is above a certain grade, there might be an issue as well in terms of recruitment.
Yes, those strategic management risk.
Yeah.
I mean,
what you're alluding. Sorry, Julie.
I was also going to say that this did come up, and I'm sure you'll remember when we had a fire. That still is causing problems, because some of the records we lost at that point in time, both councils, because they weren't in the safe, they disappeared.
Yeah.
And I know that we built in, I can't remember now what it was called, a risk to loss of accidental something or other. I can't remember the name that was given at the time.
So that's loss of information, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think
it also happens, with personnel to personnel, and it is in an area. Sometimes I think the worst situation is when there's a particular stress in a particular area, and workforce is taken on maybe either as a subcontract or on a temporary basis to get us through whatever that problem was, and then the handing over to and from that particular person is always difficult.
Yeah. So just to go back to Councillor Forder's point, I think you had a second risk, though, I think implicit in what you were saying, which is almost the failure of the existing management team, not the failure to recruit and retain them, but the risk of the existing management team, not performing or not doing something that ends up with us in trouble. And I think that is a risk I don't think we've captured, Yvonne.
No.
I think the risk you've just talked about there, Councillor Roberts, is a different one again, which is, I think, the risk of additional, it's almost the risk of we were talking about increased agency staff costs in that one that's on page 142, but you're actually talking about not just increased agency staff costs, but effectively poor agency staff or ineffective handover from them in the event of severe work pressures. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? So
Yes.
I think there's some tweaking to do to that wording potentially, but I think the risk you flagged up, Councillor Ford, is a different one that I don't think we have captured.
I think often when you've had a member of staff there for a very long period of time, everything they do isn't always recorded in the protocol and procedures that are written for that job.
Yeah.
And so that information gets lost at that point. Everybody goes, oh, so-and-so, oh, no, they won't know. I mean, I was thinking of Peter Della and the drainage, once he went across the drainage systems.
It's loss of corporate memory.
Yeah, that's a good phrase. Any other risks that anyone wanted to highlight or ask about?
I'll just go back to the risk about the new offices and just what the risk is of the costs exceeding what we publicised, what we said are 25 million. I'm aware that various large contracting companies have gone bust because they don't foresee the costs of contracts completing. And I've worked for a company where the chief executive and finance director of a listed company were both fired because they hadn't appreciated the costs to complete particular projects. I think we need to be, hopefully this isn't a problem, but we need to sort of have it be aware that it can be a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Is
that one in there?
Well, we've got risk 92/94 for Vale, which says failure to anticipate the cost of contract exits and service procurement and insourcing, which may result in increased financial burden on the council in the short to medium term. We could actually make it a little bit more generic in terms of, because that is really what it is about, not anticipating any potential increased costs as a result of the programmes that we're running maybe, and it may increase our financial burden, though we do have a thorough programme governance with regards to the new offices in Didcot, and it is regularly there are regular financial reviews on that, and that is always kept. I review their risk register on a regular basis as part of the programme governance, and finances. There's always a key risk on there that they review and make sure that they don't scope creep throughout this process, which would increase the costs. And we have gone through a period through Gateway whereby costs have escalated in terms of potential building costs due to the the economic situation. That seems to stabilise. So you get swings and roundabouts. Sometimes it does go up and you have to try and mitigate, and then it comes down again and the risk isn't a red anymore, it's maybe an amber, because it's moving with the times, because it's quite a long project. And over a long period of time. But we do have programme governance in that particular project to monitor the finances for Gateway. But we do have the risk 92/94, which is the new risk, anticipating the costs of contract exits, which we sometimes is very important because we're obviously going to be looking at new contracts and reprocuring and insourcing. So we could include it in there as a mitigation.
That's okay. So I'll hold you to that. Seeing other councils get rather stuck with projects that go over cost.
Is yours related to that as well?
Yes.
Okay, you go first.
Taking on Councillor Dragonetti's point about the new offices, joint offices. When we had the external review of scrutiny, the chap who came along, I can't remember whether it was his name or anything, he said, if I was looking at anything in this council, it would be at those new joint offices. Because he said, I can't understand why you need them. I mean, why is he felt this? I've got no idea. So because everyone's working from home now, so what are they there for, And so anyway, but that may or may not be right. But it does seem to me, as I sit on joint audit, and as I sit on one of the scrutiny committees, we don't seem to spend much time looking at it. Does it come up to joint scrutiny at all, or?
I have a feeling the final decision will come. The final decision will come through scrutiny, which is, depending on the timescales of that project, potentially later this year. I think one thing to remember about that project is both councils are in very different places. It is very much a south project.
Yeah, we're in.
And you'd be renting, so there'll be a different angle to the scrutiny review of that. So it wouldn't be something for joint scrutiny because, for example, I'm just going to double check the scrutiny work programme.
Yeah, I just the point that I was going to raise was more about that 91 about contracts ending, because I suppose I was interested in the mitigation for that one, because it's not always easy to plan when contracts are going to end. So we've kind of like ended up with a few big contracts kind of all coming to an end at the same time. But it's kind of hard to plan that. I mean, how can we mitigate? How is that being mitigated in terms of, because different service areas will be interested in different contracts. So is that the timetabling and making sure that we don't suddenly sign a load of contracts that all end in 2030? Is that kind of looked at a sort of corporate level, or is it that different service areas would be working on a contract, working towards the contract, and then we might end up with everybody ending in from 2030?
Can I answer that, or have a go? I think, to be honest, one of the challenges we face currently as an organisation is that's exactly the scenario we ended up in. So I think there's a lot of work at the moment to understand everything that we've got on our radar at the moment, which is, there are some significant contracts coming to an end alongside a number of other significant pieces of work. But I think what we're going to have to do is make sure that, and it's not guaranteed that we'll re-enter contracts for some of these things going forward. But in the event that we do, I think we've got to be very mindful that we don't create ourselves a logjam of contract end dates that. So I don't think anyone planned, to look back at when the contracts were let, they were let over many years. But they led us to this point, and I think we're more corporately aware now of the issue, the risk for us of all those end dates coming at the same time. So I think going forwards, it would be very much on SMT's radar not to end up in that scenario again. Okay,
so the mitigation would be kind of through SMT, keeping that overview and making sure that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Suddenly somebody's not going, no, don't do it that day. We've got one on that day.
just looking at scrutiny agenda, Didcot Gateway is down as an item, but it's not dated yet.
And it's also not actually down in Vale. So you may want to consider whether Vale scrutiny, those of you that are on the Vale side, it's just on south.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, sorry, Yvonne, did you want to come in again? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, going back, lack of prioritisation, if you like, in terms of having an oversight as to what's happening in the key programmes. In the old days, we didn't really have a risk methodology, which we do have, and I do go across all the key programmes to review their risk registers. It's a big job, but it means I do get a bit more of an oversight going across all of the key projects to highlight maybe where there are interdependencies and also where some of the risks start foreseeing some of the risks, if you like, with the teams. So that's ongoing. So I'm part of that programme governance. That's in some of the key projects and key programmes, which wasn't the case back in the day. So there is quite a lot of work going on, as well as making sure SMT have the oversight in terms of the key priorities to manage the situation going forward.
That's great. That's reassuring. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, just one other thing, Yvonne. In fact, going back in a way to discussions earlier about fraud and not necessarily knowing what the level of potential exposure might be and what's being measured, is fraud picked up under this? Would that fall in your remit at all?
Fraud. Well, it doesn't. You've got
cyber attack, for example.
Cyber and data security. Fraud was on this risk register, but was deemed to go back to the service risk register, as in the finance risk register. So it does sit within the finance risk register, not as a corporate risk. Maybe we need to review that going forward. Would need to.
That's specifically, if I remember rightly, Yvonne, isn't that specifically the risk of fraud around council tax business rates?
It was yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So it might be something to review.
Fraud, yes, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've put that down. Marvellous.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, anything else? Okay, right. I suppose the next question is, do we want to discuss the confidential item? I suppose, do we need to go into confidential at all? But I think we do. I think I'm seeing nods around the table that there might be some questions on that one. So have we asked everything that we want to ask on the non-confidential items of everyone? Brilliant. Okay, in that case, I will now propose that we move to exclude the public and press from this meeting. So as this appendix to the report contains a disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 and as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006, and as the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information, I would like to propose a motion to exclude public and press. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Border. Is everybody in favour of moving into confidential? Okay, that motion's passed. Therefore, the public part of the meeting is now ended. So we now need to end the public broadcast. Councillor MacDonald and I'm not sure who else needs to move into the other session, but there is a separate online. So it's just Yvonne, is it? Okay, so Yvonne and Denise, if you can log out of your current meeting and into the confidential link. We'll see you in a minute, hopefully. Just give them a moment to join.
Susie, please can we end the broadcast as well?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said